Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we're tackling something you probably remember from English class, but we're going to look at it from a completely different angle, the sonnet. Now, don't just think of it as some dusty old poem filled with fancy, archaic words. Instead, I want you to think of the sonnet as a piece of brilliantly engineered literary technology. It's literally a highly structured machine made of language, a carefully calibrated device. So today, we're going to basically reverse engineer it. We'll pop the hood, see exactly how those gears turn, and figure out why this specific framework has survived for centuries as one of our most effective tools for human expression. Here's our agenda for today. First, defining the sonnet. Second, origins and evolution. Third, the anatomy of a sonnet. Fourth, the volta, or the turn. Fifth, types of sonnets. And finally, number 6, famous sonnet sequences. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. Defining the sonnet, the 14-line blueprint.
All right, let's dive right in. The absolute, undeniable defining rule of a sonnet, its foundational blueprint, is that it's a 14-line, non-narrative lyric poem. That 14-line boundary, it's a hard constraint, kind of like the physical dimensions of a microchip. You only have so much space to work with. And what do we mean by non-narrative here? Well, it just means it doesn't set out to tell a massive, sprawling story with a complex plot or a giant cast of characters. Instead, because it's a lyric poem, it is precision designed to express intense personal feelings, maybe a fleeting thought or a deep reflection, usually from one distinct speaker. Actually, the word itself comes from the Italian word sonetto, which beautifully translates to a little sound or song. So think of it as a custom-built engine designed to capture a single powerful emotional moment within a very strict, uncompromising 14-line box. Honestly, there is probably no better example of this little song than these incredibly iconic opening lines from William Shakespeare's Sonnet 18. "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate." In just 2 lines, the machinery of this poem is already firing on all cylinders. It immediately introduces a sweeping comparison, praises beauty, and sets this tone of intense affection. You can practically hear the rhythmic humming of the gears as the speaker starts building this profound argument about immortality and love, all within the span of just a few brief words. Section 2. Origins and evolution, tracing the framework. This is a truly fascinating journey because the sonnet didn't just magically appear out of thin air. It was actually systematically invented back in the 13th century by a notary named Giacomo da Lentini at the Sicilian court in Italy. He basically took an existing folk song format and methodically grafted 6 extra lines onto it to create that magic 14-line structure we just talked about. Moving into the 14th century, this prototype was popularized in a huge way by the Italian poet Petrarch. He used it so effectively that it became the absolute gold standard for romantic poetry all across Europe. Fast forward to the 16th century, and adventurous poets like Thomas Wyatt and the Earl of Surrey imported this precise blueprint into England, translating and tweaking it for the English language. Now, it actually fell out of fashion for a little while, but it was enthusiastically revived in the 18th and 19th centuries by the Romantics and Victorians. They realized its incredible capacity for containing really profound emotional turbulence. And finally, in the 20th and 21st centuries, modernist and contemporary poets started actively subverting the form. They took this ancient aristocratic framework and pushed it to its absolute limits to address incredibly complex modern social themes, which really just proves that the underlying technology was robust enough to handle almost any subject you throw at it. Moving on to part 3, anatomy of a sonnet, inside the machine. So how do you actually build one of these things? Well, it all starts with the fuel, which in traditional English sonnets is almost always what we call iambic pentameter. This is a highly specific metrical rhythm. It has exactly 10 syllables per line, alternating perfectly between unstressed and stressed beats. Think of it like a steady human heartbeat, ba-bum, 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 ba-bum. This specific rhythm, featuring 5 of these 2-syllable iamb feet per line, is literally the rhythmic engine powering the vast majority of classic English sonnets. It is such an ingenious design because it mimics the natural, walking cadence of everyday English speech. That keeps the poem feeling grounded and relatable, while simultaneously keeping the language completely and elegantly organized. Now, this is where the engineering gets really cool. Those 14 lines are mathematically divided into different stanzas, and the division depends entirely on the specific model being used. For example, in the Petrarchan or Italian model, the 14 lines are split into 2 distinct chunks, an octave of 8 lines, and a sestet of 6 lines. The octave usually presents a problem, a doubt, or a really complex question, locked in by a super tight ABA rhyme scheme. Then, the 6-line sestet arrives to answer or resolve it. Conversely, the Shakespearean, or English model, groups the lines into 3 quatrains, which are just sets of 4 lines, followed by a final 2-line couplet at the very end. The rhyme scheme here shifts to ABA, CD, CD, EFF, GG. The Shakespearean structure acts kind of like a sports car, accelerating through an idea. It builds momentum for 12 straight lines before suddenly slamming on the brakes to deliver a final, powerful, deeply concentrated punchline in those last 2 lines.
Part 4. The Volta, the turn.
Okay, so the crucial point of any sonnet, the absolute most important moving part of the entire machine, is something called the volta. A volta is a sudden change in thought, direction, or emotion near the conclusion of the poem. It's often just referred to as the turn. I want you to imagine the volta as a literal physical hinge built right into the center of the device. In a Petrarchan sonnet, this hinge is perfectly located right between the 8-line octave and the 6-line sestet. In a Shakespearean sonnet, it usually happens a bit later, right before that final 2-line couplet. It's the exact moment the poem abruptly shifts from a problem to a resolution, or from a really difficult question to an unexpected answer, or even from darkness to light. It's the defining aha moment of the poem. It's the pivot that makes the whole 14-line structure worthwhile. And right here is a brilliant illustration of the turn in action. This is a single line from the modern poet Edna St. Vincent Millay. "Thus in the winter stands the ruined tree." Notice the word thus. In her sonnet, she spends the entire first 8 lines agonizing over the pain of fading memories and lost love. The poem is deeply rooted in very human grief. But the exact fraction of a second she hits the word thus, the entire poem pivots on that hinge. It abruptly shifts the poem into a completely new emotional direction. She abandons the direct talk of human grief to introduce an entirely new, stark metaphor about a wintry, ruined tree. The perspective zooms way out. The tone hardens. That is the volta doing its job perfectly, seamlessly redirecting the poem's entire energy in a split second.
Section 5. Types of sonnets, the variations.
Just like any piece of brilliant technology, the core sonnet blueprint has spawned so many different models over the years as ambitious poets tinkered with the design. Just look at this incredible variety of names. You've got Petrarchan, Shakespearean, Spenserian, Curdle, Caudate, Miltonic, and even the modern haiku sonnet. Now, we are absolutely not going to stop and describe the exact engine specs, syllable counts, or rhyme schemes of any of these variations. We just don't need to. Simply seeing this massive list proves how insanely adaptable and resilient the original 14-line blueprint truly is. Every single one of these variations retains the ghost of that original framework, just expertly adjusted and recalibrated to fit the exact needs of the poet holding the pen.
Part 6. Famous sonnet sequences, scaling up. Let's see what happens when poets take this technology and scale it way up. When they link these individual building blocks together to create something massive, they create what is known as a sonnet sequence. A sonnet sequence is a group of sonnets thematically unified to create a long, integrated work. If a single sonnet is a single, catchy song, well, a sequence is essentially an entire concept album, built out of individual 14-line tracks. While these sequences don't necessarily tell a direct linear story with a strict point A to point B plot, they almost always chart the complex progression of a love affair or facilitate a deep dive into a major human theme like mortality, time, or faith. By linking them together, it allows the poet to explore a single grand idea from dozens or even hundreds of completely different angles. These are some of the most famous sequences in history, monumental literary achievements that push the form to its absolute limits. You have Dante Alighieri's La Vita Nuova and Petrarch's massive Canzoniere, which contains a staggering 366 poems. Moving over into English, we see Philip Sidney's Astrophel and Stella, Edmund Spenser's Amoretti, William Shakespeare's famous 154 sonnet progression simply titled the Sonnets, and Elizabeth Barrett Browning's incredibly moving Sonnets from the Portuguese. Each of these authors used the sonnet as a recurring, hyper-reliable building block to construct a massive, timeless monument to human emotion. They proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that this little 14-line machine could be stacked endlessly to build towering works of art. So we've reverse engineered the core structure, we've explored the rich history, analyzed the exact mechanics of the volta, and seen how these tiny poems can stack together into massive sequences. I want to leave you with this final thought. If you were to sit down today and engineer your own 14-line little song, what would your dramatic turn be about? What modern problem and surprising resolution would you engineer if you drafted your own sonnet? Really think about it.
Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope you now see the sonnet not just as an old poem from English class, but as a brilliant, enduring piece of literary engineering. Keep learning, and we'll see you next time.